Welcome, world of YouTube. It's Evan Minton presenting you with another Christian apologetics video. In this series so far, we have seen that the two premises of the Kalam Cosmological Argument, whatever begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist, are true, which means that the conclusion is also true, the universe has a cause. And in the first video in this series, I did a conceptual analysis of what it means to be a cause of the universe. And we saw that the cause of the universe has to have certain properties that, when put together, looks an awful lot like the biblical God. But some skeptics say, okay, even if I grant both premises, even if I grant that everything that has a beginning has a cause for its beginning and the universe had a beginning, nevertheless, there's still problems with saying that God is the cause. Yeah, the universe had a cause, but it's not God. In this video, we're going to be looking at those objections and seeing whether or not they really do defeat the Kalam cosmological argument and therefore render this argument for God's existence unsound. So, fire up those neurons because we're about to use the brains that God gave us. Objection 1. If God made the universe, who made God? The simple answer to this question is no one. No one created God. God has always existed from eternity past. God has never not existed. Now, before you accuse me of special pleading, let me give rational justification for this. One reason is that in the conceptual analysis of the Kalam that I gave in the first video in this series, and which I'm going to bring up again later in this video, I said that the attribute of timelessness entails that the cause of the universe is uncaused or beginningless. Unless there is time, there is no before and after relationships. To have a beginning to your existence, to have someone who made you, that entails that there is a before and after relationship. That assumes that there is time. There is a time before you existed and a time after you came into existence. Since the cause of the universe created time, it therefore cannot have a beginning to its existence. Timelessness entails the property of being beginningless. Additionally, if you rule out the idea of an uncaused cause, you get thrown into a vicious infinite regress. Because if you need to have an answer to the question, if God made the universe, who made God? Then why don't you need an answer to the question, if the super God made God, then who made the super God? And who created the one who created the one who created God? And who created the one who created the one who created the one who created the one who created God? And who created the one 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 who created God? And so on back into infinity. Now, as we've seen in this video series, you cannot traverse an actually infinite series of things. If there's an infinite regress of gods giving birth to other gods, who eventually gives birth to the God who creates our universe, then we couldn't exist, because every single Yahweh in the series of Yahwehs would have an infinite number of Yahwehs that would have to be created before any of them could come into being. Before Yahweh could come into being, his heavenly Father had to come into being. And before that God could come into being, the one before him would have to come into being. And before that God could come into being, the God before him would have to come into being, and so on and so on. No creator in the infinite series of creators could ever come into being. But in that case, the universe wouldn't have come into being, and therefore we wouldn't be here having this discussion right now. So, it makes more sense to believe in an uncreated creator than to believe in an infinite series of creators begetting creators. For these two reasons, I think that the simple answer that God has always existed is quite a sufficient explanation. In fact, it makes more sense than the alternative of God having to have a creator. Because unless you say that there's an uncreated creator somewhere back in the line, there's just problems. Objection 2. because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing. Why the universe exists. Why we exist. It is not necessary to invoke God to light the blue touch paper and set the universe going. This is an objection, as you can see on the screen, from Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking's response is fallacious for two reasons. Number one, gravity isn't nothing. Gravity is a law of physics. And a law of physics is something, not nothing. Remember what the true definition of nothing is. Nothingness is the absence of anything whatsoever. Nothingness is not a thing. Nothingness is no thing. Nothingness is the total absence of being. It's a term of universal negation. When we say nothing is there, we mean there isn't anything there. Just as if we say no one's in the bathroom, that means you can use it. That doesn't mean that there's a person named no one in the bathroom. It means that there isn't anyone in the bathroom, so you can go ahead and use it. It's not occupied. So, since nothingness has no properties, how could it cause anything? Whatever brought the universe into existence couldn't have been nothing, because things don't pop into being from nothing. Nothingness has no causal properties. It doesn't have any properties. Number two, not only is gravity not nothing, gravity is a part of our universe. As such, it could not possibly bring the universe into being. If the universe came into being and gravity is a part of the universe, then that means that when the universe came into being, gravity came into being. Gravity came into being with the universe. But if gravity came into being with the universe, then gravity would need to have a cause for its existence as well. And so you don't really explain anything. To say gravity created the universe out of nothing is sort of like someone saying that my belly button is the cause of my existence. Imagine if someone told you the following: because there is such a thing as the belly button, Evan Minton will inevitably bring himself into being out of nothing. Spontaneous creation is the reason Evan is here rather than not. It is not necessary to invoke mother and father to light the blue touch paper and set Evan's life going. That would, as you can see, this statement is just as absurd as Hawking's statement. My belly button is a part of me. So how could it bring me into existence? It can't. Now, I have to say, I admire Stephen Hawking. I am a fan of him. In fact, I'm a fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson as well. I like their science programs. I've read their books, I've watched their programs on TV. They're really smart guys, and I've learned a lot of science from them. But when it comes to philosophy, and especially philosophy of religion, they don't really say the smartest things. When it comes to science, yeah, they're really brilliant in that area. When it comes to philosophy, and especially philosophizing about God, they start to say some silly things. No disrespect to Hawking, but this is a silly thing to say. As John Lennox, professor of mathematics at the University of Oxford, once said, quote, "Nonsense remains nonsense, even when spoken by world-famous scientists." Objection 3. This is a God of the Gaps argument. If I had $1 for every time this objection was brought up against the Kalam Cosmological Argument in my conversations with atheists, I'd be a wealthy man, very wealthy. Atheists say that this is a God of the Gaps argument. A God of the Gaps argument is when you observe a phenomenon that you don't know how to explain. Science can't explain it yet, so you appeal to divine activity to fill in the gap in your knowledge. Like, for example, the Norse people did not know how to explain lightning, so they said, oh, there must be a god up there wielding a hammer that produces it, Thor. But we now know that lightning has to do with the temperature in the atmosphere and electrical charges and all that stuff. Now, is the Kalam Cosmological Argument that kind of argument? I don't think so. Because the objection fails because a God of the Gaps argument, by definition, is an argument from ignorance. It's an argument on the basis of what you don't know. But the Kalam Cosmological Argument, from beginning to end, is an argument on the basis of what we do know. Anyone who makes this objection has clearly not understood a word that I said. They fell asleep in class. I gave several positive reasons for thinking that the first premise is true, whatever begins to exist has a cause, and I gave several pieces of evidence, philosophical arguments, as to demonstrate the validity of the second premise, that the universe began to exist, and I also gave scientific evidence, various strands of scientific evidence supporting Big Bang cosmology and the second law of thermodynamics. No appeals to ignorance were made in defending either premise of the argument. Now, as far as concluding that the universe's cause is God, I didn't merely assert that the cause must be a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, uncaused personal entity. I didn't merely arbitrarily assign these properties to the cause. In other words, I am not saying, oh, no scientist can explain how the universe began to exist. God must have done it. That's not how I've been arguing, and if you've been paying attention, then you will have known that. You'll know that that's not how I've been arguing. Yes, people can argue for God on the basis of the origin of the universe in that sort of gappy way, but that's not how I'm arguing. I gave reasons for thinking that the cause must have these properties. Let's go through those again. The cause must be spaceless because space began to exist at the Big Bang, or at the very least at the beginning of the Mother Universe or the Grandmother Universe. In part 2 of this series, we saw that maybe it's possible that the Big Bang was not the absolute beginning, but you have to have an absolute beginning somewhere back in the line, because just positing higher and higher levels of universes is just not going to do the trick. So the cause of the Big Bang, or the Mother Universe, or however far back you want to go, which cannot be infinite, had to be spaceless, because space began to exist. You cannot be inside of space if you are the cause of space. You cannot be inside of something until that something exists. The cause must be timeless because time began to exist at the Big Bang, or a Big Bang. The cause must be immaterial because this is an entailment of the cause's spacelessness. Matter has mass. And because material objects have mass, they need spatial dimensions in order to exist. If there is no spatial dimension, then there is no space for the material object to exist. So the cause of the universe cannot be a material object because it is the cause of all space. It must be unimaginably powerful because anything able to create out of nothing has to have enormous power, if not be omnipotent. It must be uncaused because, as we saw, you cannot have an infinite regress of creators creating creators, creating creators, creating creators. Not only that, but this is an entailment of the cause's timelessness, because there's no before and after relationship without time. There cannot be a before the cause of the universe came into being and a time after the cause of the universe came into being, because to have a time before the cause of the universe came into being and a time after the cause of the universe came into being, you would have to have time, which is what the cause created. It must be supernatural because all of nature came into being. There cannot be a natural cause of the universe, a cause coming by definition from nature. And it must be immaterial. It must be personal as a result of it being immaterial. Why? Well, there are two types of things that philosophers recognize could be immaterial things, either abstract objects like numbers or unembodied minds. But abstract objects can't cause anything. That's part of what it means to be abstract. Now, number 3 is not going to be producing any effects anytime soon. So since an abstract object cannot be the cause of the universe, the only other immaterial candidate is an unembodied mind. Objection 4. We have no evidence of immaterial minds, so we cannot say the cause of the universe is an immaterial mind. This objection simply begs the question in favor of materialism. The Kalam Cosmological Argument, if sound, and it certainly appears to be, would show that at least one immaterial mind exists, namely, the cause of the universe. We don't need to be committed to substance dualist views of the mind in order to affirm the Kalam Cosmological Argument, or to even believe that God exists in general. There are Christian philosophers, albeit in the minority, who are physicalists, such as Peter Van Inwagen. Physicalists believe that humans are purely physical through and through, that there's no soul that survives the death of the body. Christian philosophers like Inwagen believe in an afterlife because they believe God will raise us up at Christ's return. So if you have reservations about immaterial minds, when it comes to humans, those reservations just simply don't apply to God. And again, I gave positive arguments for why the cause of the universe must be an immaterial mind. There are 3 actually, but I gave only one for the sake, in my first video, for brevity's sake. The 3 arguments are, first, as I've already gone through, it's an entailment of the cause's immateriality. Secondly, if the cause of the universe wasn't a personal free agent, then the Big Bang would have happened infinitely long ago, and hence we would have an eternally old universe instead of one that has an age of about 14 billion years. In his book, The Home and Quick Source Guide to Christian Apologetics, Doug Powell gives an excellent illustration to make this point. He writes, quote, "Note that this description only describes what is necessary for the Big Bang to work. But if there is such an entity as the one described, it is still not sufficient for the creation of the universe. Just because this entity does exist does not mean the universe must exist. Something is still missing: intentionality, a will to make it happen. A car that has a working engine, a healthy battery, a properly connected electrical cable engine, and is full of gas has all the necessary conditions for running. Although they have the necessary conditions, they lack the sufficient conditions. Cars that are moving down the street have necessary and sufficient conditions for running. That is why they are moving. What do the moving cars have that the parked cars do not? They have drivers. And what is a driver? It is a being that is not part of the car, has the power to start the car, and does not rely on the car for its existence, and has the will to start the car. Thus, the universe needs a driver, an intelligent agent that is capable of choosing whether to create the universe or not," end quote. In Powell's car illustration, the reason the car was started a finite time ago is that a person got in and purposefully turned the ignition. The only scenario in which the necessary and sufficient conditions can be present from eternity past, yet the effect not be just as eternal as its cause, is if the deciding factor in bringing about the effect is a free choice. The third reason why the cause must be personal has been well explained by the philosopher Richard Swinburne. Swinburne points out that there are 2 types of explanations: scientific explanations and personal explanations. Scientific explanations have to do with the laws of nature, while personal explanations have to do with the desire of persons. Imagine that you walked into your kitchen and find that the pot is boiling on the stove. You ask your roommate why it's boiling. One way he could answer would be, the heat from the copper bottom causes the water molecules to vibrate more and more violently until they're thrown off in the form of steam. Sounds like the kind of answer Sheldon Cooper would give his roommate Leonard on an episode of the Big Bang Theory CBS sitcom. Another way to answer your friend's question would be with a personal explanation. He could say, I put it on in order to make macaroni and cheese. Do you want some? The Sheldon Cooper type of answer is a scientific explanation. The latter is a personal explanation. Swinburne argues that the explanation for why the universe came into being cannot be a scientific explanation. The reason is that the Big Bang was the origin of nature. Since nature came into being, there cannot be a natural or scientific explanation for why it popped into existence. But in that case, the only other possibility is that the explanation is personal. That is to say, someone wanted the universe to exist. For these three reasons, I think we have good reason to believe in the personhood of the universe's cause. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you've enjoyed this series on the Kalam Cosmological Argument so far. If you're an atheist, I hope I've convinced you. I hope I've convinced you to become a theist. And if you're a Christian, I hope I've strengthened your faith and you are now more convinced than you were before that God exists. And if you're not convinced, then why aren't you convinced? Leave a comment in the comment section below. Let's have a discussion. I always read comments and I try to respond to every comment that I can, whether it be on the YouTube channel or on my blog. And if you like the video, leave a like. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications so that you're always alerted when I have new content up, and if you would, consider becoming a patron. The Patreon support that I've gotten so far has really helped the ministry go far, and that's it for today's video. So, see you next time.